Well, hello, everyone. Welcome again to another edition of Luke Reacts. And joining me today is none other than Jesse Rojo, the great Jesse Rojo.
What's up, everyone?
And we are going to talk about this survey that we did of Hispanic Christians in not just America, but really focused on six battleground states. Jesse, tell me about this survey. Why did we do it? What's up with it?
Well, it's clear for many of us that the Latino voting bloc is a very significant um, bloc for determining the swing of this election, which is hence the swing states. And we're going to get great insights from these particular states because you even see it in the numbers how they kind of almost evenly divide between conservative, moderate, and liberal. So I think we're going to get great insights in terms of how the community thinks concerning certain issues, recent issues with the Gaza war, for example, the decision for a ceasefire, Biden's overall performance in the Near East. I think it's good to see how they think about this and how much of that position of a candidate concerning any of these matters could affect the Hispanic vote in the swing states.
So those swing states that we covered, what were they again? I think if I remember right, was it Arizona,
Correct.
Nevada,
Wisconsin,
Georgia,
Pennsylvania,
and Georgia,
yeah,
and Michigan. I think.
Michigan. Correct. That's right.
Correct. So yeah, those are still battlegrounds, even with the current, tumultuous events going on over the last several days. And why Jesse is the Hispanic voting bloc? What's unique about them
Of
versus
course.
other blocs?
I mean, it's right now is the fastest, largest growing community in the region, and United States next to Mexico is the largest Spanish-speaking country in the world. So you really have a significant amount of Hispanics that are contributing to the development of this country, to uh, our communities, and unfortunately, a lot more pouring in from the borders, and so we don't understand how they view many of these matters. Perhaps we assume that we think that we know them, and we even learned some of that through some of the insights that we saw the survey. We saw some things that were actually surprising. Some others no, but even interesting to learn. And so I think right now it's because of the moment that we're in, the elections, the determining factor that Hispanic vote can be in this election. More than ever, it matters to see how, especially to think on these issues that we think are of global impact: the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, global anti-Semitism growing all over the world. And so we work with the Hispanic community, and we want the Latino community not only to be the difference in our country, but to be the difference with our friends that are in the region, are in the world, who think and support the values that we believe.
So, Jesse, I'm going to bring up a couple of the slides that were prepared for us. Gray Matter Media was the group that did the survey for us, and so they did a great job. And we're going to cover some of these things. I'm putting them up right here. So the first slide we have here talks about general attitudes, and one of the first things out of the gate is we did ask, what are you a Christian? And that was the survey was of Hispanic Christians, and so we actually asked, are you a Christian? And everybody who took it, the survey, said yes, right? But then we asked, what was the follow-up question that we asked, right? What is your spiritual engagement look like? What was the results of that?
Yeah, so when someone identifies as Christian, does not necessarily mean they're active in their faith. So 6 out of 10 Latino Christians have low or zero spiritual engagement. It's important because it's not just how many service you attend a week, but not only if you're reading your Bible, but if you're studying your Bible, right? How much of your time you're actually dedicating to studying the scriptures, which is it's another way of measuring the spiritual engagement of our participants.
Right. So there is that cultural Christianity element within Hispanic Christianity in the United States, right? I guess that's what we're seeing in these numbers, right?
Yeah.
60% of those who self-identify as Christian are basically cultural Christians. Now, I know there are people that get upset with cultural Christianity, but I think it actually, maybe it's not salvific. Not all these people who self-identify as Christians are have any kind of relationship with Jesus Christ, but
Of course.
at the
It's
same time,
impossible to tell, right? That's
it is.
between them and God.
It is, but it is also like it does have this leavening effect on society. Like if you
Yeah.
actually think, that your actions do matter, it might impact how you act, right?
Yeah, 100%. We saw that in our survey when, for example, those who tended to have a positive perception of Israel also tended to have a higher percentage of spiritual engagement, and the Bible also had to have a significant impact in their perception of Israel, which was very different from others, perhaps that had social media or some mainstream media channel that impacted their views. When it came to those who were more conservative and more spiritually engaged, the Bible was at least 40% of the influence in their opinion.
Well, that's really interesting. Let's take
A
a
jab at
segue
that?
here. Yeah, yeah. I want to go into that a little bit.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why do you think that the Bible has such an impact on people's views of Israel and Jewish people?
Well, I think it's because they also have a high view of the scripture and how much the scripture is an authority in all things spiritual. And so, if you cannot be and I say this, with respect, I don't know any particular situation, but you cannot be a faithful Christian if you don't actually read and study your Bible. You have to understand the the documents that are demanding of you faith and sacrifice. So if you don't if the Bible doesn't hold a high place in your life, then it's very likely that you're going to at least struggle in many of these other spiritual exercises that is expected of a faithful Christian. So I wouldn't be surprised. And as a child of the Reformation, sola scriptura is a big part of how many evangelicals, even if subconsciously, is how they view the scriptures. Scripture is higher, the maximum authority in all things life to the believer, above the anything else. So I think that's part of it, uh, at least.
And so Philos Latino has been very active in trying to help the Spanish speaking world in particular better understand, not only understand the Bible and understand how to think about it and see the relevance of Israel today as part of that ongoing story.
Yeah.
But you guys put something out this last year that is intended to really help Spanish speaking audiences better understand the story of Israel.
Yeah.
What?
I think you're referring to our flagship resource, the Chronological Study Bible. Yeah. So of course, and which I'm glad that this we see these numbers, because when we see numbers such as 40% say that the Bible was a primary influence in how they view Israel, then it justifies the whole purpose of bringing out this study Bible to the audience, which is the first study Bible. Well, first of all, there are other chronological study Bibles, and what's different with this Bible is that other Bibles, they put the books of the Bible in chronological order according to the date that the books of the Bible were written. The difference with this study Bible is that it's organizing the events of the Bible in chronological order. So the creation, the Adam's, Abraham sacrificing Isaac on the mountain, the crossing of the Red Sea, when those events historically or chronologically took place. So it's a phenomenal resource because it's purely academic. It's not theological, it's not telling you how to think about the Bible, but it's giving you all the scientific resources, reflective of the latest discoveries and technology, whatever information that we have to date, so that you can study the Bible in its cultural and historical context. You can understand the words and the events as they took place in God's redemptive history. Now that's one part. That's let's say Bible timeline since creation all the way to 70 AD to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. That's where all study Bibles, or all Bibles rather, end. What Philos Project did with the study Bible is that it continued the timeline of the Bible all the way till today,
Mm.
to tell the story of post-biblical Judaism. What happened to the Jews after the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem? Where did they disperse by the Romans? How did they get to Latin America? What is Judaism, and so forth? So you even hear the story of what is Zionism? How did Zionism start? How would,
Mm.
what are the most important historical events in the history of the Jews and the history of Israel, in order so that the reader of the Bible has those resources as they read the Bible and they think about the people of Israel, they think about the Jewish people, they have the latest information available in their Bible concerning the history of the Jewish people. And as you can see, and we have seen this in our survey, one of the biggest obstacles to getting the folks to have the right view on what's happening with Israel and the Jewish community is lack of knowledge and understanding. It's this huge block of ignorance that has not left just a complete void, but that void has been filled by conspiracy theories and all sorts of hateful declarations that are often made as well by political leaders in certain countries. So I think we are changing the game with this study Bible to really help the reader connect deeply with the words in the Bible in its historical and cultural context, but also better understand modern Israel, the story of the Jewish people, which oftentimes not only Hispanics, but Christians in general don't know. And we've already put it into action with our programs, strips. Oh man, I can talk about it. By the way, I should say it's been top seller. It got recognized at the best study Bible in 2023, HarperCollins,
Wow.
and it's been moving 400 units a month. All right, so it's remarkable. We are very happy to be a part of this project, and we hope it continues to bless the church.
So we'll drop a link to where people can buy that study Bible in the comment section. So let's get back to this survey. So our second point of general attitudes here. Let me just read it. That many Latino Christians aren't highly engaged with the news. A minority, 44%, follow international news in general. Even fewer, 39%, closely follow news about the Gaza conflict. So tell me about the news consumption. That was a big part of our survey. Tell
Yeah,
me about the news consumption
yeah.
the
Well,
Hispanic.
it's true of the Latino community that um, a lot of what impacts how we perceive many things is media and social media. But perhaps in the Hispanic community is there's a larger tendency to do so. In fact, they're more likely to be engaged in social media perhaps than other people groups in the United States. Part of the reasons I believe that is because we have what we call um, we're long distance family oriented. We have a lot of family in Latin America and we connect via social media. WhatsApp, for example, is one of those predominantly used platforms. So we see when we ask them, we see that a lot of the influence has come really from the news reports that they received from mainstream media and channels. But social media also played a huge part in that. 48% said news reports, 43% said social media.
Mm.
And it's important. It's because we actually did a survey back in 2017 and we saw the same thing. So nothing's changed actually with regards to that. Media still continues to be a predominantly influential vehicle in Hispanic opinion concerning Israel and the Jewish people. So that tells us that we cannot take social media for granted, or media for that matter. We need to be able to prepare for that kind of stuff. But with those, this is what's interesting. Again, going back to the idea of this Bible being
Mm.
an influence with those who sympathize with Israel, they said 38% of the influence came from the Bible. So there's a correlation between those who tend to read their Bible, be more faithful to the scriptures, to those who end up sympathizing with Israel. And it's obviously because Israel kind of plays a role in the whole story of the Bible. I don't know if you noticed, but
It does, right? All the New Testament authors were Jewish, and obviously the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament
Yeah,
writers were
yeah.
also Jewish.
Yeah,
So
and here's another interesting point too, Luke, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but it's also with regards to Latino Christians who are also more engaged in spiritual activities, they were more likely to choose Christian media as an influence, as a positive influence toward Israel. So I don't know. Sometimes we talk about media and we don't necessarily think about how Christian media can also be an important ally in telling the truth and communicating the truth and showing the real side of Israel. In moments like these.
no, that's super important, and you guys do a lot of work in social media. I've seen the stuff that you guys put out. It's not only is it really high quality, but it's also very interesting. All right, so let me keep going. Push this back. The survey again. Point three. Half believe the U.S. has the right amount of involvement with Israel in general. One third feel the U.S. does too much, while 17% believe the U.S. does too little. So most people seem to be like, it's the right amount. How might any deeper insights into this point right
Yeah.
here?
Well, it's perhaps true that the majority of the people, if media is the predominant influential vehicle, that they're going to see what the media puts out there concerning U.S. support for Israel. And oftentimes, it's a controversial issue because there's some major debate in Congress about, some package going towards Israel, and so it can be perceived that way that the U.S. is actually giving the right amount. But I just came from Israel, and we just had a group of you know the most influential top leaders in our network, and we had a chance to meet with members of ministers of the government and members of Knesset, and almost all of them said the same thing. We asked them like, what do you need from the U.S.? And they said arsenal, ammunition. They're fighting a war, and they don't have enough. They don't have enough bullets to defend themselves. And so when people think that the US is giving the right amount, they don't realize what actually is happening on the ground.
Mhm.
And oftentimes we may have the right amount to do, but that doesn't mean we're giving it to them because it's a political move for some, particular administration, to hold back support in order to gain some sort of voting block. But I think it's important to show that if you want the Latino vote, Latinos strongly stand by Israel and they strongly stand by their friends.
Mhm.
And when you leave your friend behind like that, when they most need you, then I think they have every right to question, how truly committed we are to this cause.
Yeah, there certainly has been it's one of those aspects of politics, perhaps, where there's one thing that they said over in the news or in social media by the administration, but it's a totally different thing what actually ends up on the ground. And
Yeah.
there's been a big disconnect between those two things, particularly in the last several
Yeah,
months.
and here's another thought, because the perception is that Hamas is the underdog here, right? But you notice that they run, they always complain about running out of humanitarian aid, running out of food. They never run out of rockets, though, right? And one Qassam rocket is like $800, and on the day of October 7, they launched over 3,000 rockets into Israel. How much
Right,
money is that, right?
right.
So we can't leave our friends behind. We cannot let Israel fight this war by themselves, because the reason why terrorism hasn't reached our shores to the level that it can reach is because Israel's the buffer. Israel's
Right.
holding it back. And we just heard declarations from a Hezbollah leader saying, yeah, Israel's not the primary enemy. Israel's just a first step. They see the US as the main enemy. So that's the real world.
Yeah, for real. One more question here, one more thought from the general attitudes. So, 4 out of 10 Latino Christians in these swing states believe that Jewish Americans have too much influence in American society, including 12% who feel this way strongly. Only 21% disagree strongly with this statement. It's one of those often perceived as a anti-Semitic trope. Can you kind of unpack that a little for us, Jesse? Is there really this kind of problem of anti-Semitism within the Hispanic community, and how do you feel like what are some important
Yeah.
ways that can be addressed?
Yeah. Although the Hispanic community may have a higher or more positive perception of Israel and may be very strongly pro-Israel, that doesn't necessarily translate into being pro-Jewish and having a positive perception of the Jewish people. In fact, it can be so that on the one hand, they could be very supportive of Israel, on the other hand, turn around and say, "Yeah, but them Jews," however,
Right.
and start saying a number of anti-Semitic tropes. And there are a lot of reasons. You have to remember that, and this is no negative feedback to our Catholic friends and so forth, but Latin America was predominantly Catholic for hundreds of years, and so a lot of the conspiracy theories that um, fomented a lot of the anti-Semitism in Europe came to Latin America as well, and has heavily influenced perception of Israel. And that's happened because it just goes from family from family. I remember one pastor who it's very influential, representing hundreds of churches, seven to 600 churches in the United States. And we had a Shabbat dinner. This was back in March. And in our last dinner, she confessed, she said, after that Shabbat dinner, I completely changed my perception of the Jewish people. Because since I was a little girl, when an aunt told me, "Don't you ever become Jewish," just that one statement just created this negative perception. My aunt doesn't want me to become Jewish. There must be something bad about them. And
Mhm.
she said, and she was a much older woman now, so all those years, that one statement that her aunt said as a child affected her perception of the Jewish people.
Mm.
And there's only one way that we can challenge that, is by building relationships between Jews and Latinos, sitting down, going across the other side of the street and connecting with the synagogue, participating, and invite your as well, if you're Jewish, invite your Latino neighbors to your home for a Shabbat dinner. Show them what a normal day in a Jewish home looks like, because most Hispanics don't realize that a normal day looks not that different from a normal day in a Latino home. And in fact, there's a lot of things that we can learn to appreciate from a Shabbat dinner, because Latinos, obviously, they're very family oriented. They
Right.
love their kids. They love um, their building and cultivating a peaceful home. And when they see that the Jewish people has been able to do that over and over again through these beautiful Shabbat dinners, they walk away inspired and changed. They don't look at the Jewish people the same after that. So it is a problem, and we saw the same numbers in our last survey, roughly
Yeah.
around 42%. But I think we're changing that. I really truly believe, because we've been building these relationships, bringing them together, and to the measure that we keep doing more of that, which that's an invitation to all of our Jewish friends, come and let's build these communities together. The more we'll be able to change that perception, and foment stronger friendships, stronger solidarity between each other. This is what "Yo soy parte" is right here. "Yo soy parte." It's a solidarity movement between Jews and Latinos.
Jesse
Uh,
likes to pick on me with that, because there was a point back in the day where he kept talking about this guy Joyce Aparte, and I was like, when am I going to meet this guy? He's talking about him all the time. Yeah, I didn't know. Didn't know.
that's
I was
typical
expecting
gringo
at first.
movement.
I was like, another one of Jesse's friends. Instead it was like his logo. So, anyways, I thought it was funny. Made me laugh. Made everybody laugh. Still
Yeah.
makes me laugh. Let me keep going. I'm gonna pull up this next slide here. So in this one, we're kind of getting into really kind of the crux of what the survey was really getting at,
Yeah.
which is this, for us, our intersection where we start gauging in political stuff is really, how do things impact Israel or the perception of Israel, Jewish people, Palestinian people, all this sort of stuff, right? And so we wanted to get at this. So, first point here is that President Biden generally gets moderate to low marks on job performance related to Israel and the Middle East, average 20% positive, 40% negative on these four issues. So how does I mean, I think the survey broke out in terms of there was like 33%, if I remember, Jesse, correct me if I'm wrong, but 33% identified as conservative, 39% identified as moderate, and then I think 29% identified as liberal.
Yeah.
You almost kind of see that playing out here, where even the liberal ones kind of move over to the not doing so well.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
How does it move in terms of
Like,
their general?
what are
Yeah.
they picking up about, in the media or whatever, or somewhere else perhaps, this kind of, they don't think Biden is doing well.
Oh, well, I think first of all is that they just see it with their own eyes. You just can't deny the truth. At the withdrawal from Afghanistan is a perfect example of that. During the administration of Trump, this is no endorsement of no particular party, by the way. It's just comparing, you know, apples with apples. And during the Trump administration, he evacuated how many? 13,000, 15,000 soldiers from Afghanistan. Not one single American died around the process. Biden had to withdraw only 3,000, and we saw the chaos because just a poorly executed plan. From withdrawing the soldiers before, withdrawing them first to leaving American citizens behind, and so this is something that the whole world saw. Whether you're on the left and the right, you essentially agree on the facts, and we saw that all through the board. You see obviously different variations between conservative and liberals, but liberals were twice as much likely to have an unfavorable view of Biden's performance on all things Middle East, right? And you saw that all across the board. You see that in his handling of the Gaza conflict, in how he responded to the pro-Palestinian demonstrations, or his performance on U.S.-Israel relations. Liberals, 32% saw that unfavorable versus 24. Conservatives were 55% versus 17%. And its overall Middle East policy, it was just generally rejected by both liberals and conservative. It's obvious no new wars happened during the Trump administration, and so you see what Hamas is doing, what Russia's done, and we hear it. We go to Israel all the time. We go to the Near East all the time. We hear it from people on the ground, that for them they would feel safer when somebody that actually comes with more clear terms and a little bit more a direct approach to Middle East issues. It's just the way that part of the world, unfortunately, works.
Hmm. Interesting. So let me pull this up again. All right. So next thing is, a majority see Israel's policy at least somewhat important in their preference for the national candidate. However, these issues pale in comparison to economy, healthcare, abortion, etc. At this is really like, where does the Israel issue fit in the list of issues that Latinos care about, right? So first of
Mhm.
all, the first one obviously is the economy. I think is, and that was the one that was the strongest factor in picking a
Yeah.
support for one candidate or the other. Where does Israel rank in that list?
Yeah. Oh, for me, Israel definitely. Well, in general with the Latino community, it doesn't surprise me that it's not going to be number one, number two in the top five, but it certainly is in the top 10 because they see how the issues in this region affects us globally.
Mm.
And they see the rise of the influence of Hezbollah in Latin America. And so these things are concerning. In fact, there was a large number of Latinos who said that they have increased their concern about extreme Islamic extremism in the region, and so they're not, let's say, you know, they're not losing their sleep over it, right? But they're certainly concerned, and they understand that having the right people in leadership, creating the right policies, defending the right people is important to defend as well their own quality of life and their community. So more and more, and as we're taking hundreds of pastors all the time to Israel, we hear them and all the time expressing, we're going into a third world war, right? Because what happened after October 7 was, next basically for Israel, 9/11. It was one of the most atrocious events that they could have ever lived, and most certainly we're going to see the repercussions for years to come from that event. So
Let me push this a little bit further and bring up this next point. You said
yeah,
over half of Latino Christians were more concerned today about Islamic extremism within the U.S. than they were a year ago,
yeah,
whereas just 13% were less concerned, right? Like so. To your point about kind of the rise of Hezbollah within Latin America, but like what they're observing, on college campuses or in their
yeah,
own cities. I mean, there's a lot of disruption has taken place
100%.
within big cities in the United States, and a lot of them uh, are because of people wearing um, the kafiyas and waving the flags, the Palestinian flag, but also you see in there Hamas flags and Hezbollah flags. How does those movements, particularly Hezbollah and Hamas, how do they factor into the perception of Islam within Latin America or within the Spanish speaking community in the United States?
Well, unfortunately, it does have um, a very negative impact on our perception of Islam in general, because that's what you see. That's what um, unfortunately becomes viral, right? And when you see that some of the same actors who have financially supported and militarily supported the acts that took place on October 7 are the same actors that are in cahoots with other leaders in Latin America, you start wondering, how much time is it going to take until these extremists come here? Because if they hate the USA and we live in the USA, well, it might hit me too, right?
So
And
do you think, let me ask you this, do you think that there is is some of the perception of groups like Hezbollah and Hamas really a direct correlation to what they're seeing with Latin American leaders, presidents, prime ministers, like Iran, shows up in Venezuela or Cuba or something like that? It like is it that partnership, that alliance that gets formed? Is that one of the sources of this kind of concern and negative
yeah,
perception?
of course, I had an opportunity in 2018. I think it was in 2018, correct, to visit Bolivia, for example. And this is one of the first times that it made me realize how important it is to establish good diplomacy with the right people in the region. Bolivia at that time was going through a very interesting social movement. They were just like a revolution, and Evo Morales left the government because of apparent accusation of committing election fraud. And the organizations of American states actually did the investigation and concluded that there were frauds. So as a result, Evo Morales left the country, resigned from being president. And so we had an opportunity with a small group of leader of Hispanics to meet the interim government at the time and the interim president. And was the first decision they made as an interim government was to reestablish relations with Israel. Because
Mm.
back in 2014, Evo Morales declared Israel as a terrorist state. And Evo Morales has this government has very strong ties with Hezbollah and Iran. And so when they were making this statement, they were trying to make a statement to break those ties as well and be able to build the right relationships that can help them recover their country, reestablish their values. And that's another story how it ended up, but it shows that this is how leaders in government see their approach to establishing diplomacy with Israel. This is more than just politics. This is also our values. This is also defending our friends and those that can help us in exchange.
No, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. I think you one time told me that one of the free uh, TV channels that you can get with like rabbit ears or like the antenna is connected to Iran, right? Is it
Yeah,
like
yeah, Hispan TV and these major channels roughly come from RT News, most of the news that from the Middle East, which is sponsored by Russia, and Hispan TV, which is sponsored by Iran. Predominantly the news that they take, in addition to perhaps CNN and Espanol and Univision, but all of the news is curated by these two entities that already have a particular perception of Israel and an agenda to portray Israel a certain way.
it's really interesting to me, and I think about this not just in the Hispanic space, but other like you have this. It's very interesting that even though you have the influence of like RT Russia Today in Spanish or the Iranian one, or even Univision or like these channels, they're not necessarily either they're kind of neutral or negative, and then really negative. That's all the direction they go, right?
Yeah,
Like how many
basically.
like what they're really you don't get in kind of mainstream secular Hispanic media
Yeah,
a pro-Israel position, and yet you have these numbers we're seeing, which is the majority supporting.
yeah,
And so it like you know it what imagine what the numbers would be, right? If
yeah,
if the media that was being presented was positive,
yeah,
because you already have the majority, even with the media being negative. And
yeah,
so it is important that there be outlets and channels that are putting forth very
yeah.
positive messages,
And,
and I know a lot of people are working at that.
and part of it also comes from politics, whoever is in government. I'll give you an example. I have friends in Colombia, very close friends who are very involved on pro-Israel advocacy and strengthening the ties between Colombia and Dominican and not Dominican Republic, Colombia. I have Dominican in my mind. No, Dominican, Colombia, and Israel. Because they've always had very strong relations. Israel's done a lot to help and support Colombia. And what happened after Petro, the current government, has come out openly making anti-Israel statements and declarations and so forth, and pro-Palestinian this, he made a whole conference in Colombia sponsored by the government in support of the Palestinian cause. Ever since that, we hear friends for the first time saying we're getting attacked by everyone, by our family members, by our neighbors. Like it's like almost like Petro gave the anti-Semites a free license to come out, and they're all out the closet now. So it sometimes it comes down to that as well. The kind of leaders we have in government and what kind of relationships they're bringing into the table.
All right, so one more point on this in this kind of slide deck right here. Let me pull it up. So views of Israel are much more likely to be positive than of Palestine. Whether the comparison is with the nation state, the government, or the people, least likely, this is a very fortunate point, the least likely to be viewed positively is Hamas. Mind you, it's still a little bit bothersome that there's 13% of those polled, saw Hamas favorably, but that's in this kind of bottom left-hand corner here.
Yeah,
But like, why do you think that? I mean, why do you think that is? Why do you think
yeah,
the perception is more favorable towards Israel
yeah.
than
Well, again, I would like to point to the fact that I think the Bible has a big part to do with it. You grow up in church, you read the scriptures, you read the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, and you can't help but fall in love with the people of Israel, to identify with their struggle, right? Because the story of Israel, in one way, is a story of all of us, and how we, as individuals and as collective, as nations, we succeed and fail in pursuing God. So I think that there's a cultivation from that happens within the church, and again, a lot of churches as well. Just because they love Israel, the culture of Israel, they would have an Israeli flag within their church, or they will have a night to worship Israel or to pray for it, not worship Israel, but to pray for Israel, right? Um, and so it's cultivated within the culture. Guatemala, in all of their public schools, on a weekly basis, they pray for the peace of Jerusalem
Mm.
in their public schools, right?
Amazing.
So
I don't
it's
even know if I know if every church is praying for the peace of Jerusalem, even though it's a transit, right?
yeah, it should be. We should be praying because it's in the Bible, and we currently still await for the hope of Zion, where the Messiah will descend and establish His kingdom there. So, guys, I mean, it's pretty evident that it's within our faith to really have a positive perception of Israel, to love Israel, um, and I think is also true because Latinos and Jews have also coexisted for hundreds of years.
Mm,
Since 1492, the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, both Jews and Muslims were expelled, but Jews had to leave everything. They had 3 months timed, and they had to leave everything,
mm,
to go into wherever the world leads them, wherever they can find a place. And many of them came to Latin America. So
mm,
for hundreds of thousands of years, I was meeting. I'll put it like this: I was meeting in this previous trip. We invited the ambassador of Dominican Republic to Israel to join us for dinner. One of the projects he's doing is in the street called Dominican Republic in Jerusalem. There's a small plaza, and he wants to get support to establish a monument to the founder of Dominican Republic, the founding father of Dominican Republic, Juan Pablo Duarte. Why? Because he was of Sephardic descent.
mm,
And there were many Sephardic Jews who supported the independent movement of Dominican Republic during the early 1800s. So there's that memory that lives within our culture and within our history that it's gonna surpass whatever media says. I think that's more powerful. That memory, that connection is way more powerful than whatever media says and whatever anybody else says. Um, but it doesn't mean that we we can't lose that. It doesn't mean that it's not at risk. We certainly need to be more intentional and building upon that and continuing to cultivate that because we can make a difference. We can truly change not only we can change the world together if we really put our put our strength together and come together as one unit.
amazing. So we have one slide with some question or some kind of points. Bring up one last. So this is specifically on the conflict in Gaza. So it says 1/3 feel largely not informed or knowledgeable about the conflict, 1/3 moderately so, and at least 1/3 fairly well informed or knowledgeable about it. So I think you raised this point perhaps a little bit earlier, but how is the kind of the knowledge gap impact the perception of
Yeah,
Israel, or how the war is going?
yeah.
Are Hispanics following the war at all? Is it relevant to them?
Yeah, yeah. For me, ignorance is worse than disinformation because ignorance paralyzes you. You don't know if you shouldn't, because you don't know enough about it, about the situation. And for the majority of Hispanics, they look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a landmine, right?
Mm,
Like you have to tread carefully because you don't want to offend the wrong person, and that happens within the church and outside the church, unfortunately. I'd say cowardice is the biggest sin, killing the church, honestly, because if it was just Israel, but it's the same thing with the gospel, it's the same thing with the cardinal doctrines of the faith.
mm,
If you're afraid to talk about Israel, what the Bible clearly says about Israel, and what makes you think you won't be afraid to talk about the Bible, the gospel, when society applies the right amount of pressure? Right?
right.
So ignorance, I think, can foment a lot more fear and insecurity among our people to be able to, stand and become more advocate. That's why we do such a lot of our work. We do a lot, traveling and events and all that stuff. But in reality, a lot of our efforts and resources are directed in education and
Yeah.
educating and doing educational trips or resources, because that is important. It is important to be available to the Latino community and to be available in Spanish, because uh, although many of them consume English, but many of them, especially current leaders who are 50 years and above, predominantly consume Spanish written, right, works. So that's that.
Yeah, right. But you have, so you're one of the things that we've talked about is having some kind of like certificate program or something that kind of
Yes,
helps particularly like pastors or lay leaders who want to go deeper, want to have a bit more
yes,
knowledge, gives them kind of those footholds that help address some of
a hundred
these.
percent. I'm glad you brought that up because Um, and so if it was just ignorance to the level where they recognize, oh, I don't know enough, but sometimes it's that we're conditioned to view things a certain way.
Mm,
And the majority of Hispanic pastors, because of, if you imagine many of them are bivocationally, they have to work 3 to 4 jobs, or they don't make enough ends to go to seminary, to get the proper training, to acquire the scientific tools to properly interpret the Bible. And so they will embrace whatever is the traditional position, concerning Israel and the Jewish people. And unfortunately, it happens to be, anti-Jewish hermeneutics. It happens to be oftentimes replacement theology. And so we are very excited that we're going to introduce a certificate program on biblical sciences, the tools of biblical sciences applied in advocacy and leadership. And this is going to provide them, like I said, the scientific tools in order to know how to interpret the Bible in its cultural and historical context. So they'll know what was the historical context of the Old Testament, for example. What was the historical context of the New Testament? They'll take courses on Hebrew and on Greek. There's a course on archaeology as well, which two of those courses they'll be able to take in Israel as part of our Israel program directed for Hispanic pastors,
mm,
where we're allowing, it's a highly subsidized trip where pastors, for a minimum donation of $1,300, they get to go to a 10-day trip to Israel that's going to allow them to not only do tourism but dive deep on issues related to modern Israel, acquire the tools, the scientific tools, again, to become a better interpreter, a better student of the Bible. These are tools that they'll be able to use for anything, but they're
mm.
going to get it with us. One of our research fellows is a Dominican, close brother of mine, Josias de la Cruz, who finished a master's at Bar Ilan University, one of the best schools in the world on Hebrew studies. And right now he's finishing a PhD in philology. And so his expertise is biblical sciences, and he's going to help us design the certificate program. He will be the director of the program, um, all in Spanish, by the way, so that those Hispanic pastors that want to dive deep into Israel, they will get the tools that they need. Which, by the way, I mean, you can also mention the master's program that we're doing with Yeshiva University, which is offered to Latinos and even beyond that, as another opportunity for pastors and Christians to really acquire the skills they need to understand the Bible in its proper context and so forth. So you could probably say a lot more than I can on that, but
Yeah, no,
yeah.
yeah, I think I touched a nerve. Everybody who's watching, it's like it's clearly Jesse's passion is to help bridge this knowledge gap, and both of the programs you talked about, the one that's for the pastors, but also our partnership with Yeshiva University they have a master's in Jewish studies from Yeshiva is the preeminent Orthodox Jewish university in the United States, and we just are finishing up our first cohort. Our second cohort is getting started here. They're learning Hebrew. It's a really good program, and we reach out to the Fields Project for more information on both of those programs. So
Mm.
let me keep going. I don't want to run us out of time. So um, let me. So the next point is the perception is Hamas is most likely to be held responsible for starting the conflict and for continuing it, but about 4 out of 10 are not sure about either. That's this is rather embarrassing, I think, because it's like unsure about who started this, but it shows, to the previous point about the lack of knowledge, but it's even deeper than that. It's there is that whole talk of shifting blame, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, yes, October 7th was terrible, but you got to understand October 7th within the framework of 70 years of occupation, or like, that kind of rhetoric.
Yeah.
And so is it, I guess the question is it, are we dealing with like, is it shallow in terms of they just don't know who is responsible, or is it deeper than that, meaning they've
Yeah.
picked up on that kind of um,
Yeah.
that perception
Yeah.
that, yeah, it's not as clear as you think, Luke. It's an extra
Yeah.
thing. Where's the
Well,
lie?
yes, I suspect is that on the one hand, it is just they don't know enough about what's happening. I also think, and this is because I saw it happen even within my own church during the protests, the university protests that happened across the country, the encampments and so forth. A lot of the kids, the children of Hispanic parents were pressured to
Mhm.
pick a side. I remember a parent coming to me and he's like, "I'm concerned for my son because he's being pressured every day to pick a side, and and I'm sure it happened all across the country where their kids came home and whether they probably wore a kufia that day, or maybe they invited them to come to the night to pray for Israel, and their son said no because they're genocide or something. I'm sure those conflicts came to their homes, and I wouldn't be surprised if that had something to bear in their decision when they came to this question, perhaps more so now than before. But I think overall, even in those cases, if these parents had the knowledge and they knew the facts, they would probably push back. But because they don't, they are afraid.
Right.
Yeah,
No, that level of intimidation factor is real, and
yeah,
I've talked to a lot of people over the years about the problem with it never takes a lot of people. You don't ever have to get the majority in order to have a movement kind of take root.
yeah,
No more than, I think, no more than 5 or 7% of Nazi Germany ever joined the Nazi Party. No more than
yeah,
10% of China is members of the Communist Party. I think only 3% of the South ever owned slaves, and yet in all of those instances, that super small minority dictates or dictated what the majority
yeah,
thought, and
yeah,
and costs are quite significant to those, right? So I think that there is that pressure, and most people are just will just go along to get along,
yeah,
and it leads to you know like the intimidation factor is real.
yeah,
All right, I think I have one last question here. And this one is um no, sorry, I got two more. We'll go through them fast, Jesse.
yeah,
So sympathize equally with both or neither side of the conflict. 29% have greater sympathy for Israel's side, 19% for the Palestinian side. This is one of those questions that is often frustrating to ask, right? Because we knew all along what kind of answer we were going to get when we put this one together, right?
yeah,
Because it is such a, I mean, I would say that if you ask me, uh, let's say 2009, before I was involved in this space at all, before I knew any Jews, if
Yeah.
you had asked me, do you support Israel, do you support Palestinians, or do you support both or neither? Like both or neither is like what I would have said,
Yeah.
right? Because like
It's the
I think
easiest answer.
it's the easiest answer. It's the easiest answer. Like I think Christians in general are trained to not pick sides or
Yeah.
not be seen as picking sides. So I
Yeah.
think we don't want to like we want to kind of be the neutral players in this, even though I'm not sure we should be.
Yeah.
But like, how does this? What do you think about this?
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised. Like it's like you said, it's a cop out answer. It's the easiest, right? The less controversial response that you could give. So most people would do that, and it's happened before as well with other surveys that we've done. Um, Look, it should be to some extent that we care about both Palestinians and Israelis, and I think nobody is necessarily saying that, but but perhaps I wonder if that's how they saw it, and not necessarily did they see it within the context of the war of the conflict,
Right.
right? So perhaps they probably thought of it in general terms, and of course we should preach the gospel to all nations and show the love of Christ to all peoples. So I think that's kind of the insights we were trying to get, but it is one of the more frustrating answers or questions to ask because it's hard to gauge insight from those responses.
Yeah. I got one more question
Yep.
here. See that we want to unpack. So 6 out of 10 would like to see a ceasefire contingent on Hamas returning all the hostages. 1 out of 4 say there should be a ceasefire even if the hostages are not returned, and 15% feel Israel should prosecute the conflict until Hamas is defeated.
Hmm.
Right. So you have those kind of three positions, right?
Yeah.
Like you know the vast majority, 60%,
Yeah.
want to see really the hostages returned. There's about
Yeah.
120 hostages still being held by Hamas. That almost like from the beginning really has been what everybody has said is the you want to end this war, return the
Return
hostages.
the hostages. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And that's what most of the Latinos want to see. They don't want to see Israel leave behind these babies. We were in near Oz
Yeah.
kibbutz, and we were standing in front of the home of the Bibas kids. A 4-month-old baby that was kidnapped, who
Mm,
became 1 year old somewhere under some terror tunnel. The other one who was 4 years old. Till date, that baby has lived his life on Earth more inside of a terrorist tunnel than he has had in freedom. Hey, you think about that. It's and so it's hard not to see that and not see the fact that obviously we cannot leave them behind. No solution is a good solution when you leave your people behind. That is giving the victory to Hamas. And I'm glad that 15% came out as well and said, Israel shouldn't stop until Hamas is defeated.
yeah,
Because
that's Luke Boone's position. I'm
yeah,
wearing my Hamas sucks T-shirt here. That's yeah, man.
look, this is
Not minority. Uh,
yeah, this is not a church dispute. This is war, guys. This is a conflict. And unfortunately, there's a lot of evil people in this world, and Israel is on the receiving end of those evil doers, and quite frequently. Okay, people forget. I wrote about the last ceasefire that Israel and Hamas had in 2021. That means on October 6th of 2023, there was already a ceasefire in place
yeah.
since 2021. Okay, so on October 7th, Hamas violated the ceasefire. Okay, entered into territories, Israeli territory, and murdered perhaps the most pro-Palestinian people in all of Israel, which is ironic, right? They
Right.
murdered the people that stood by them, literally lived as close as what, 2 kilometers away, 1 kilometer away from the Gaza Strip, that gave them jobs. One of the ladies that survived the event on October 7th gave us a tour in the South, and she said, "I made a mistake.
Mm.
I made a mistake of letting one of them eat in my home and work in our kibbutz, in our neighborhood, because they found maps and dead bodies of terrorists that were handed to them by some of the workers that crossed over the border." So, the morale of the Israeli people is on the floor after such an act of, betrayal and violence. And so I'm glad that there are some people that realize that there is no solution that's going to remain in place. There's no ceasefire that's going to remain in place so long as Hamas stays in power.
Yeah, no, that well, it's also encouraging that that the Hispanic community, here is recognizing that there is hostages, right?
Yeah.
And that I think we're being very clear eyed about this. So I think it's a good statistic, and it's a good place to leave off. Jesse, any final thoughts about what you saw in this survey, stuff that we didn't include that you think is important to bring up to our listeners?
Well, one of the things was the theological beliefs that shaped their views,
Mm.
which was very encouraging. Because if the Bible is such a influential factor in Hispanic opinion concerning Israel, we wanted to ask specific questions with regards to, God's covenant with the people of Israel. Is that fulfillment or not fulfilled? And so the numbers were very encouraging. For example, when we asked them their beliefs concerning fulfillment of God's covenant, 65% believe Israel's establishment is a fulfillment of God's covenant with the Jewish people. So Israel's modern establishment in 1948, most of them see it as a fulfillment of prophecy. And 23% of that strongly believe this. We also asked them if they believe that Jews are still God's chosen people. 20% believe Jews are still God's chosen people today. Although 16% feel Christians have replaced Jews in this role. That was an interesting one, right? It's not, I mean, although 65% saw the establishment of Israel as fulfillment of prophecy, again, concerning the Jewish people, the responses vary. It's
Right.
different how we perceive ourselves in relation to the Jewish people. So more Christians here, or they seem more divided with regards to whether or not Jews are still God's chosen people compared to the church. Also an interesting fact. And yeah, and that's about it. Then all the other ones, basically we've already stated in our conversation, but how most of them actually cited religious reasons as well among those who sympathize more with Israel, such as beliefs that Jews are God's chosen people. So faith plays a huge part in how we view the world, and especially Israel and the Jewish people. So I believe in faith-based engagement, faith-based diplomacy, because I don't think the scriptures that God gave us was meant for us to just keep it inside our hearts. He wanted us to promote it in our society. Those are the best principles to provide the most inclusive, democratic, and and successful society that humanity can create. And so I think, I walk away very much encouraged, because the Latino people, they show a lot of potential to come up with their own opinions about what's happening in the world, and more beginning to realize the special opportunity that we have to really make a difference in our country, and make a difference, with our allies in the world.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Jesse, thank you very much for joining me. I think it's a really important survey. I think it's really helpful data for everybody who is kind of interested in this space. I think you and I have talked about the perception of the Hispanic community, is that they're a kind of monolithic, and what we see in this data is that they're not,
Yeah.
and that it's they're divided politically,
Hmm.
and so that begins to play itself out as we see it in this survey. So uh, we'll drop links here for those who want to kind of follow Jesse's work. He does a lot on social media. He's got these great Instagram sites and stuff like that. So we'll include those in our links below. For those who have not yet done so, I can't believe it. As many times as I've asked, I need you to like and subscribe. It's super important. Also, comment. Drop
Yeah.
some comments in here. I will respond to some of them if they're worth responding to. So write them good. And then also, we are donor funded, right? So it's people like you, viewers like you, who support the work of the Philos Project, and that includes the work of Philos Latino.
Mm.
And so, if you want to give, that will be also in our link section. So, thank you all very much for watching. Thank you, Jesse, for joining me, and we'll see all you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.